On our first wedding night, I decided to prank my wife and hid under the bed. But when the door flew open, someone else came into the room, took out a phone, and put it on speaker. What I heard next. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Lewis Holloway had never considered himself remarkable. At 42, he'd built a life that was steady rather than spectacular, profitable rather than flashy. His logistics company operated out of a modest office park in Fenton, Missouri, handling supply chain coordination for mid-sized manufacturers throughout the Midwest. The work was unglamorous, tracking shipments, negotiating contracts, managing warehouse relationships. But it paid well enough that Lewis owned his home outright and kept a healthy cushion in savings. 15 years he'd spent building that business from nothing. 15 years of 60-hour weeks, missed holidays, and careful decisions that compounded into something solid, something real. He'd never been the type to chase excitement. His ex-wife from his 20s had left him for exactly that reason, complaining that life with Lewis felt like watching paint dry in slow motion. That divorce had stung, but not enough to change who he was. Lewis liked predictability. He liked knowing that when he made a decision based on logic and patience, it would probably work out. That philosophy had served him well in business. In love, he'd learned it made him vulnerable. Lewis met Nancy Reeves on a Tuesday afternoon in late spring, when Missouri humidity was just beginning its annual assault and the sky hung heavy with the promise of storms. He'd stopped by a boutique near his office to buy a birthday gift for his sister. Nothing he couldn't have ordered online, but he preferred supporting local businesses when he could. Nancy was behind the counter, ringing up another customer. Lewis noticed her immediately, though he couldn't have said exactly why. She wasn't classically beautiful in the way magazines defined it. Her features were softer, more approachable. Brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. Hazel eyes that seemed genuinely warm when she looked at people. A smile that felt real rather than practiced. What caught his attention was how she moved, efficient but not rushed, attentive without being overbearing. She treated each customer like they mattered, asking questions about their day, remembering details they'd mentioned on previous visits. When an elderly woman struggled with her credit card, Nancy didn't rush her or show impatience. She simply helped, quietly and kindly. When Lewis's turn came, Nancy asked what his sister liked. He found himself talking more than he'd intended, mentioning her love of gardening, her recent promotion, the way she collected weird coffee mugs from every vacation. Nancy listened, really listened, and suggested a silk scarf with a botanical print that Lewis never would have considered, but immediately knew was perfect. "You're good at this," he said as she wrapped it. Nancy shrugged, but her smile deepened. "I like helping people find the right thing. Most folks just need someone to listen." That simple exchange stayed with Lewis longer than it should have. He found reasons to stop by the boutique over the following weeks. A gift for a client, new curtains for his home office, a throw blanket he didn't need. Each time, Nancy was there, remembering him, asking about his sister, mentioning a book she thought he might like based on something he'd said the previous week. 3 months in, he asked her to dinner. Nancy said yes immediately, then laughed. "I was starting to think you'd never ask. I was running out of reasons to suggest things you might want to buy." That first dinner stretched into 4 hours at a quiet Italian restaurant on the edge of town. Nancy talked about her childhood, the instability of moving between relatives after her mother died young and her father couldn't cope, the anxiety of never quite feeling secure anywhere, the way money had always been something other people had while she scraped by. She'd worked since she was 16, always part-time, never quite able to get ahead of the bills. "I know it sounds pathetic," she said, stirring her wine without drinking it. "But all I've ever really wanted is stability. A place that's mine. A life that doesn't feel like it could evaporate any second." Lewis understood that desire more than he let on. He'd built his entire adult life around creating exactly that kind of security. "It's not pathetic," he told her. "It's honest." They dated for 8 months before Lewis proposed. Looking back later, he'd realized he'd rushed it, letting sympathy and affection override his usual caution. But at the time, it felt right. Nancy made him laugh. She listened when he talked about work stress. She seemed genuinely interested in his life, asking detailed questions about the business, about his goals, about what he wanted for the future. His friends said he was lucky. Nancy was charming at gatherings, remembering everyone's names, asking about their kids, complimenting details they'd be flattered she noticed. She posted photos of them online, carefully curated moments that made their relationship look effortless and joyful. Lewis didn't care much about social media, but Nancy seemed to enjoy it, and it made her happy. At home, though, something shifted after the engagement. Nancy began asking more questions about his finances. How much the business grossed annually, what his savings looked like, whether he had life insurance. The house, was it fully paid off? What would it appraise for? She framed these questions as practical, as responsible planning for their future together. Lewis answered honestly. He'd always been transparent about money, believing that secrets bred problems. Nancy listened carefully to every answer, sometimes taking notes on her phone. I just want to understand everything, she explained when he asked about the notes. I grew up not understanding money, and it hurt me. I don't want to be ignorant about our finances. That seemed reasonable, admirable, even. The wedding was small, exactly as Lewis preferred. Close friends and family at a vineyard outside the city, simple vows, good food. Nancy wore a cream-colored dress that she'd agonized over for weeks, changing her mind 3 times before settling on something elegant but understated. She looked beautiful, Lewis thought, standing across from him as they promised to love and cherish each other. He meant those words. He thought she did too. The reception ended earlier than planned when a storm rolled in, sending guests scrambling to their cars under sudden sheets of rain. Lewis and Nancy laughed as they ran to his truck, her dress soaked through, his suit jacket held over both their heads in a futile attempt at shelter. They drove to the house, their house now, legally, while rain hammered the windshield and lightning cracked the sky open in jagged white lines. What way to start a marriage, Nancy said, wringing water from her hair. Could be worse, Lewis replied. At least the ceremony finished. Inside, the house felt warm and quiet, insulated from the storm. They decorated minimally for the occasion. Flowers on the dining table, champagne chilling in the kitchen, soft music playing from speakers Lewis had installed months ago. Nancy excused herself to change out of the wet dress. Lewis loosened his tie and poured 2 glasses of champagne, setting them on the bedroom nightstand. The plan was simple. Toast to their future, talk until they fell asleep, wake up married and happy. That's when Lewis had what seemed like a harmless idea. He'd always been playful in small, stupid ways. Harmless pranks that made Nancy laugh. Once he'd hidden her phone in the refrigerator. Another time he'd rearranged all her shoes so the pairs were separated. Nothing mean-spirited, just silly. Hiding under the bed to scare her felt like the kind of newlywed fun moment they'd laugh about for years. Lewis slipped his jacket off, knelt down, and slid himself under the bed frame. The space was tight, dust bunnies tickling his nose, the underside of the box spring pressing close above him. He could see his sliver of a room, the nightstand legs, the edge of the bathroom door, a corner of the window where rain streaked down in endless patterns. He waited and waited. Nancy was taking longer than expected. He heard the shower run, then silence. Minutes passed. 10, 15. His back started to ache against the floor. His initial amusement faded into mild annoyance, then into something closer to puzzlement. Where was she? Then he heard the bedroom door open. But Nancy wasn't alone. Lewis's breath caught. Through the narrow gap between the bed frame and the floor, he could see 2 sets of feet. Nancy's, bare, still damp from the shower, and men's boots. Work boots, scuffed and mud-stained. A man's voice, deep and casual. Took you long enough. I had to make sure he was settled, Nancy replied. Her tone was different, flatter, businesslike, nothing like the soft warmth she'd used at the reception hours earlier. The boots moved to the bed. The mattress compressed above Lewis as the man sat down. Lewis's heart hammered so hard he was certain they'd hear it. Put on speaker, the man said. Nancy did. The phone rang twice before someone answered. Another male voice, older, rougher. Well, we're good, Nancy said. The wedding went fine. Everything's in place. And he suspects nothing? Nothing. He trusts me completely. That's the easy part. Lewis felt his entire body go cold. Not with panic, not even with fear. With a sudden, terrible clarity that cut through every assumption he'd built about his life over the past year. Once he's gone, the voice on the phone continued. You'll have access to all of it. The accounts, the house, the business. You said the business alone is worth, what, $500,000? At least, Nancy said. She sounded calm, almost bored. He told me it grosses around $400,000 a year. Net is probably half that after expenses. But the client contracts are valuable. Someone could buy it outright and keep the revenue stream. And you're sure about the life insurance? $250,000. I watched him sign the beneficiary form 3 weeks ago. The man on the bed, the one with the work boots, spoke up. So what's the timeline? I'm not waiting around for months while you play house. We wait, Nancy said sharply. We stick to the plan. If we rush this, people get suspicious. We need time to establish the marriage, make it look real. 6 months minimum. Maybe a year to be safe. A year. The man on the bed sounded irritated. You said. I said we do this right. Nancy cut him off. Lewis isn't stupid. If something happens to him too soon after the wedding, there will be questions. We need to look like a normal couple. Happy. Stable. Then, when it happens, it looks like a tragic accident. Bad luck. No one suspects anything. The man on the phone laughed, a harsh bark of sound. You're cold, Nancy. I'll give you that. I'm practical, she corrected. I didn't marry him for love. I married him for stability. And now I want more than just stability. I want security. Real security. The kind money actually buys. Lewis lay frozen beneath the bed, his mind cataloging every word with the same methodical precision he used for business contracts. He wasn't emotional. He wasn't devastated. He was filing information, organizing it, preparing to use it. What about the prenup? The phone voice asked. There isn't one. He never even suggested it. He said he trusted me, that we were building a life together, that legal protection would just insult what we have. Nancy's laugh was quiet and cruel. He's a good man. That's his weakness. The man on the bed stood. Lewis watched the boots move toward the window. You better be right about this. I've got debts that won't wait forever. You'll get your share, Nancy said. Just be patient. Patient. The word dripped with contempt. Easy for you to say. You're living in a nice house, eating nice food, playing a happy wife. I'm in a shithole apartment, working construction while you take your time. Would you rather we both end up in prison? Nancy's voice went cold. Because that's what happens if we're sloppy. So yes, you'll be patient, or you'll get nothing. Understood. A long silence. Understood, the man finally said. The phone call ended. Lewis heard Nancy's feet move to the closet, the sound of hangers sliding on the rod. The man stayed by the window, rain still hammering against the glass. I should go, he said eventually. Use the back door. And be careful driving in this weather. Yeah, wouldn't want anything to happen to me before I get my cut. Nancy didn't respond. The boots moved across the room. The door opened and closed, and then there was only silence and rain. Lewis remained perfectly still beneath the bed. His mind was racing, but his body was calm. He'd learned long ago that panic accomplished nothing. Analysis did. Understanding did. Planning did. Nancy moved around the room for another few minutes, then left. Lewis heard her footsteps descend the stairs, heard the faint sound of the television turning on in the living room. Only then did he slide out from under the bed. He stood slowly, his back protesting the 30 minutes spent on hardwood. He looked around the bedroom, in his house on his wedding night, and felt nothing but a cold, settled resolve. Nancy had made a mistake. She'd underestimated him, assumed his kindness was weakness, mistaken his trust for blindness. Lewis walked to the window and looked out at the storm. Lightning illuminated the yard in brief, stark flashes. The rain showed no signs of stopping. He thought about going downstairs and confronting her immediately, demanding answers, throwing her out. But that would be emotional, reactive, stupid. Nancy had planned this carefully. She'd spent months, maybe longer, setting him up. She had people helping her. The man with the work boots, the man on the phone, possibly others. If Lewis confronted her now, she'd have time to adjust, to cover her tracks. to spin a story that made her look like the victim and him like a paranoid husband. No, Lewis needed to do what he did best: gather information, document everything, build an airtight case, and only move when he was certain of the outcome. He went to the bedroom door and listened. The television was still on downstairs. Nancy was probably waiting for him to come down to play the happy newlywed to toast their future together. Lewis took a slow breath and descended the stairs. Nancy was on the couch, wearing comfortable clothes now, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked up when he entered, her smile immediate and warm. "There you are. I was starting to think you fell asleep. Come sit with me." Lewis sat beside her, accepting the champagne glass she offered. "Sorry, I caught up thinking about work stuff. I should probably stop doing that." "It's fine." She leaned against him, comfortable and affectionate. "I know the business is important to you. I'd never ask you to stop caring about it." They clinked glasses, drank, talked about nothing: the rain, the wedding, which guests had seemed to enjoy themselves most. Lewis played his part perfectly, smiled when expected, laughed at her jokes, agreed that they should sleep in tomorrow, that they'd earned a lazy morning after all the wedding stress. All the while, his mind was working. He thought about that conversation under the bed, about Nancy's flat, businesslike tone when she wasn't performing, about the man with the work boots, clearly someone she knew well, trusted with serious crimes, about the timeline she'd mentioned, 6 months to a year before they made their move. That gave Lewis time. Nancy kissed him goodnight and headed upstairs. Lewis stayed on the couch, claiming he wanted to finish his champagne and decompress from the day. She didn't question it. When he was certain she was asleep, Lewis went to his home office. The house was his, purchased 5 years before he'd ever met Nancy. That meant certain legal protections. It also meant the security system, modest but functional, was entirely under his control. Lewis pulled up the security footage from earlier that evening. The cameras were disclosed in the homeowner documents, standard legal protection against liability. Nancy had signed those papers when she'd moved in after the engagement, barely glancing at them, excited to finally have a stable home. Lewis scrolled through the footage. There, the bedroom camera showing the bed, the window, the doorway. He watched himself slide under the bed. Watched Nancy enter minutes later with a man Lewis didn't recognize. Late 30s, rough-looking, exactly as the work boots had suggested. The audio wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough. Every word, every incriminating detail. Lewis saved the footage to 3 separate drives. One in the house safe, one in his office, one in his safety deposit box he'd visit first thing Monday morning. Then he did something that would have seemed paranoid a day ago, but now felt like basic survival. He started documenting everything. He created a secure file on his computer, logged the date, time, and content of the conversation he'd witnessed. Noted the man's physical description: around 6 feet, heavy build, brown hair, work clothes. He checked their joint bank account and credit cards. Nothing unusual yet, but he set up alerts for any transaction over $50. He reviewed his business accounts separately. Everything was still in order, but he made a mental note to speak with his lawyer about updating certain authorizations. Finally, Lewis allowed himself one quiet moment of something close to grief. Not for Nancy, for what he'd thought they had, for the version of her that had never actually existed, for the future he'd imagined that was already dead. But grief was a luxury he couldn't afford. Lewis closed his laptop, turned off the office light, and went upstairs. Nancy was asleep, breathing softly, looking peaceful and innocent. Lewis lay beside her in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain finally begin to slow. He'd built his business by being patient, by watching, by waiting for exactly the right moment to make exactly the right move. He could do the same with this. The morning after his wedding, Lewis woke to sunlight streaming through bedroom curtains and the smell of coffee drifting up from the kitchen. For one disoriented moment, he forgot. Then memory crashed back. The man with the work boots, Nancy's cold voice discussing his murder like a business transaction, the champagne toast that followed as if nothing had happened. Nancy was already downstairs. Lewis heard her humming something cheerful, heard cabinet doors opening and closing. When he descended, She was plating French toast, fresh strawberries arranged in a neat pattern on top. "Good morning, husband," she said brightly, turning to kiss his cheek. "I thought we deserved a nice breakfast. First day of our new life together." Louis accepted the kiss, returned the smile, played the part. "Smells amazing. You didn't have to do all this." "I wanted to." Nancy set the plates on the table, poured coffee into matching mugs. "I know I'm not the world's best cook, but I can handle breakfast." They ate together while Nancy chatted about redecorating ideas, about wanting to update the living room furniture, about maybe taking a belated honeymoon in a few months when Louis could get away from work. Every word felt like glass in Louis's chest, but his face remained pleasant. Engaged. He asked questions about her decorating ideas, agreed that a vacation sounded nice eventually, complimented the French toast genuinely, because it actually was good. Nancy seemed pleased, relaxed, convinced her performance was working. Louis decided his first priority was identifying the man from last night. Over the following weeks, he watched Nancy carefully without appearing to watch her at all. He noted when she checked her phone more frequently than usual, when she showered and changed clothes before running errands, when she claimed to be meeting friends but came home smelling like cigarette smoked despite not smoking herself. He never confronted her, never questioned, just observed and documented. 3 weeks after the wedding, Nancy mentioned she was joining a gym. "I've been so stressed with the wedding planning, and now I want to get back in shape. Is that okay?" "Of course," Louis said. "Whatever makes you happy." The gym membership seemed legitimate enough. She came home in workout clothes, sweaty and tired, complaining about how much the trainer pushed her. But Louis noticed she went at odd times. 10 in the morning on Tuesdays, 3 in the afternoon on Thursdays. Not the schedule of someone fitting workouts around a job. Nancy had quit her boutique position after the wedding, claiming she wanted to focus on making their home perfect, on supporting Louis's business. He'd encouraged it, thinking she deserved security after years of financial instability. Now he recognized it for what it was, freedom to move without a work schedule pinning her down. Louis hired a private investigator. Not dramatically. No late-night meetings in parking garages. He simply called a firm his business lawyer recommended, explained the situation factually, and hired them to document Nancy's movements on days she claimed to be at the gym. The investigator was a woman in her 50s named Rebecca Torres, former police detective, now running her own practice. She listened to Louis's story without judgment, took notes efficiently, and quoted a reasonable rate. "How long do you want surveillance?" she asked. "As long as it takes to establish a pattern," Louis said. "I need documentation, not just suspicion." Rebecca nodded. "Smart. Suspicion doesn't hold up anywhere that matters." The results came back within 2 weeks. Nancy wasn't going to the gym. She was meeting the man from the wedding night, identified now as Dylan Mercer, 38, divorced, working as an independent contractor with a history of tax problems and a credit score in the low 500s. They met at his apartment on the east side of the city, a rundown complex where the parking lot had more potholes than pavement. Nancy would arrive mid-morning, stay for 2 to 3 hours, leave looking freshly showered. Rebecca's photos were thorough. Nancy entering the building. Nancy and Dylan visible through a partially open window. Nancy leaving, checking her phone, driving directly home. "There's more," Rebecca said when they met to review the findings. She slid another folder across the coffee shop table. "Financial records. Public information, all legal. Dylan Mercer owes back child support, has 3 max credit cards, and just had a judgment filed against him for unpaid contractor work. He's underwater financially." Louis absorbed this information the way he absorbed shipping manifests, carefully, noting every relevant detail. "And your wife," Rebecca continued, her voice neutral, "has been making small cash withdrawals from your joint account. Nothing dramatic. 50 here, 100 there. Totals about 2,000 over the past month." Louis had suspected as much, but seeing it confirmed in hard numbers made something tighten in his chest. She's been careful about the amounts. Very careful. Someone who knows that big withdrawals trigger attention, but small ones just look like grocery shopping or gas money. Rebecca paused. "You want my professional opinion?" "Always." This isn't her first time planning something like this. The methodical approach, the small movements, the carefully constructed cover story, that takes practice. Or coaching. Rebecca leaned back in her chair. You should consider that there might be others involved beyond Dylan Mercer. Lewis thought about the voice on the phone from the wedding night. I have reason to believe there are. Rebecca's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Then you need to be very, very careful. And you need documentation of everything, not just the affair. That became Lewis's full-time, secondary occupation, documentation. He monitored every transaction on their accounts, saved screenshots, created spreadsheets, tracking patterns. He made copies of receipts Nancy threw away. Dinners she claimed were with friends, but the portions and prices suggested otherwise. Gas station purchases far across town from where she said she'd been. A receipt from a hardware store for items he never saw arrive at the house. He went through the home security footage methodically, night after night in his office while Nancy slept upstairs. He saw Dylan visit the house twice more while Lewis was at work, the man letting himself in with a key Lewis hadn't authorized. Saw Nancy and Dylan in the living room with paperwork spread across the coffee table, pointing at documents Lewis couldn't quite make out on camera but could guess the content of. And he listened. Lewis found, purchased, and installed additional recording equipment in his own home. Legal in Missouri for protecting one's property. Disclosed in the homeowner documents Nancy had signed and ignored. The conversations he captured made his original wedding night discovery seem almost tame. One afternoon in late June, 3 months into the marriage, Lewis left for the office but returned an hour later claiming he'd forgotten an important file. Nancy's car was gone. She'd mentioned something about shopping, but Dylan's truck sat in the driveway. Lewis parked down the street and called Rebecca. I need you to document something, he said. My house. Right now. Rebecca arrived within 20 minutes, camera ready. Lewis didn't go inside. He let Rebecca photograph Dylan's presence, the timeline, the evidence of unauthorized access. Then he went to his office for real and listened to the recording later that evening. Nancy and Dylan argued about money. I'm tired of waiting, Dylan said, his voice tight with frustration. You've been saying soon for months. Meanwhile, I'm dodging creditors and eating ramen while you live in this nice house with your nice husband. It hasn't been months, Nancy snapped back. It's barely been 3. And if you rush this, we'll both end up in prison. Is that what you want? I want my life to not be shit. Then be patient for a few more months. Maybe half a year. We need to establish normalcy. Happy marriage. No red flags. Then, when it happens, I'll be the grieving widow nobody suspects. A long pause. Then Dylan, quieter. How are you planning to do it? I don't know yet. I'm researching. It has to look accidental. A fall, maybe. Or carbon monoxide. Something that doesn't raise questions. You're talking about murdering your husband. I'm talking about improving both our situations. Don't act like you're not getting paid. How much again? We split everything after the house sells and the insurance pays out. Probably $300,000 for you minimum. More if I can liquidate the business for a good price. Dylan was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted, calculating rather than angry. And you're sure he doesn't suspect anything? Lewis. Nancy laughed, genuinely amused. He's a good man, Dylan. Honest. Trusting. He believes I love him. He'd never imagine I was capable of this. Nobody thinks their wife is planning to kill them. Exactly. Which is why it'll work. Lewis sat in his office that evening, listening to this conversation for the 3rd time, and felt nothing but cold, settled determination. Nancy was wrong about one thing. He absolutely imagined she was capable of this, because she'd already shown him she was. Lewis expanded his documentation strategy. He set up a separate cloud account Nancy couldn't access and uploaded everything. Photos, recordings, financial records, Rebecca's investigative reports, time-stamped evidence of every meeting between Nancy and Dylan. He consulted with a lawyer, not their family lawyer, but a different one specializing in criminal defense. The lawyer listened to a carefully edited version of the situation and provided clear advice. Document everything. Don't confront until you have enough evidence that law enforcement will take it seriously. And whatever you do, don't let her know you're aware. People get dangerous when they're cornered. Lewis also made quiet changes to his business operations. He updated certain authorizations, removed Nancy's name from documents she'd been added to as his wife, transferred some assets into structures she couldn't easily access. He did all this carefully, gradually, so nothing would seem sudden or suspicious. At home, he continued playing the role of oblivious husband. He took Nancy to dinner at nice restaurants, complimented her new clothes, agreed when she suggested they update the kitchen, listened to her talk about her day, knowing most of it was fabricated. It was exhausting, but Lewis had built a business through discipline and patience. He could do this too. For months into the marriage, Nancy's behavior shifted. She became more affectionate, almost aggressive about it. She'd initiate intimacy more frequently, cook his favorite meals unprompted, ask detailed questions about his work with apparent genuine interest. At first, Lewis thought she was feeling guilty. Then he realized the truth. She was establishing a pattern, creating evidence of a loving marriage, building a narrative for when people started asking questions after his accident. The thought was chilling in its calculation. That same week, Rebecca called with new information. "I've identified the third person," she said without preamble. "The one on the phone from your wedding night. Nancy's uncle, Frank Reeves. He's had a record, fraud mostly. Spent 2 years in prison about a decade ago. Lives in Illinois now, supposedly legit, but my contactor says he's still running small cons." Lewis absorbed this. Nancy told me her family was unstable, but not that there was criminal history. She probably edited the story. Frank's been careful since getting out. Nothing provable. But word is he mentors people looking to run insurance scams or inheritance schemes. My guess? He's the brains. Nancy's the execution. Dylan's the muscle if needed. Professional, then. As professional as amateurs get. Rebecca hesitated. "Lewis, I have to ask, how far are you planning to take this?" "As far as it needs to go. Because at some point, you'll need to involve law enforcement. And when you do, you need to be prepared for everything to come out, the recordings, the surveillance, all of it. Some people won't like how you gathered evidence." "Everything I've done is legal in Missouri," Lewis said calmly. "I've checked, repeatedly. Legal and socially acceptable aren't always the same thing. Just be ready for judgment." Lewis had already considered that. Some people would say he should have confronted Nancy immediately. Should have kicked her out, filed for divorce, moved on. Those people didn't understand what it felt like to lie in bed next to someone plotting your murder, to smile across a dinner table at someone calculating how much your death was worth. They didn't understand that this wasn't about revenge. It was about consequences. 6 months into the marriage, on a humid August evening, Nancy made her first real mistake. Lewis came home from work to find her in the kitchen, cooking dinner, phone on the counter. She was distracted, stirring something on the stove while music played softly from the speaker system. Her phone buzzed. A text notification. Lewis glanced at it, casually, like a husband might. The preview showed a message from Dylan. "When? I can't keep doing this." Nancy didn't notice Lewis had seen it. She finished cooking. They ate dinner. She talked about wanting to repaint the bedroom. That night, after Nancy fell asleep, Lewis checked the cloud backup of her texts. She'd been sloppy. The texts between her and Dylan went back months. Arguments about money, discussions about timing, Dylan pressuring her to move faster, Nancy insisting they had to wait. And there, dated 3 days ago, "I've been researching methods. Carbon monoxide seems cleanest. House has a garage. Car running overnight. Looks accidental if done right." Dylan's response. "You're sure about this?" Nancy. "I'm sure I want the life I deserve. Lewis is just in the way." Lewis read that exchange 3 times. Then he called Rebecca. "I need to know about carbon monoxide detectors," he said. "Do I have them in my house?" A pause on the other end. "Lewis, what happened?" He told her. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was harder than he'd ever heard it. "You need to go to the police. Now. Tonight. This isn't theoretical anymore. She's actively planning to kill you." "Not yet. Lewis. Not yet." He repeated, calmer. "I need more. I need absolute proof. Text messages can be explained away. She could claim they were jokes, or Dylan misunderstood, or they were talking about a character in a show. I need irrefutable evidence. You could be dead before you get it. I'll be careful. Rebecca made an exasperated sound. You're betting your life on careful. I've been betting my business on careful for 15 years. It hasn't failed me yet. The next day, Lewis installed new carbon monoxide detectors throughout the house. Professional grade, loud, impossible to disable quietly. He told Nancy they were an upgrade he'd been meaning to do. She looked at them for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across her face. That's good thinking. 2 weeks later, Nancy tried a different approach. Lewis came home to find dinner already prepared. His favorite meal, steaks cooked perfectly, good wine breathing on the counter. Nancy seemed nervous, which was unusual. What's the occasion? Lewis asked. No occasion. I just wanted to do something nice for you. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. You've been working so hard. You deserve it. They ate. Nancy watched him carefully, almost expectantly, as he finished his steak. Lewis noticed she barely touched hers. He also noticed, subtly, that his wine tasted slightly off. Not spoiled, just wrong in a way he couldn't quite define. He set the glass down, pretending to still have some, but didn't drink more. You okay? Nancy asked. You seem tired. Long day. Might turn in early. He excused himself, went upstairs, and quietly poured the remaining wine into a sealed container. Later, he'd have it tested. That night, he didn't sleep in the bedroom. He told Nancy he was working late on a project, stayed in his office, locked the door. The wine test came back 3 days later from a private lab. Diphenhydramine, sleep medication, enough to knock out an adult for several hours. Not enough to kill directly, but enough to make someone unconscious while something else did the work. Lewis felt that cold clarity settle over him again. Nancy was escalating. The timeline she discussed with Dylan, 6 months to a year, was narrowing. She was getting impatient. And impatient people made mistakes. Lewis needed her to make one more. One final, irrefutable mistake. He had an idea. 7 months into the marriage, Lewis began the final phase of his plan. He started acting tired, distracted, forgetting small things, where he'd put his keys, appointments he'd normally remember, details from conversations. Nothing dramatic, just enough to seem like a man under stress. At work, he mentioned to a few employees that he hadn't been sleeping well, that he felt run down. He scheduled a doctor's appointment and made sure Nancy knew about it. She seemed pleased when he told her, "You should definitely see someone. You haven't seemed like yourself lately." The doctor found nothing wrong, of course. Lewis was in excellent health, but the appointment created a record. A paper trail showing he'd been concerned about his health shortly before whatever Nancy was planning. At home, Lewis began leaving windows of opportunity. He'd mentioned he'd be working late, giving Nancy time alone in the house. He'd take sleep medication, actual prescribed medication in normal doses, and tell her about it. He'd make himself seem vulnerable, all while the cameras recorded everything. All while Rebecca's team documented Nancy's movements. All while the evidence accumulated like compound interest. Nancy started spending more time on her phone. More time at the gym. That Lewis knew meant more time with Dylan. More time researching, planning, preparing. Lewis could feel it building. The tension, the approaching climax. He gave her one final opening. On a Thursday evening in late September, Lewis told Nancy he wasn't feeling well. Headache, nausea, probably just stress from a difficult client contract. Why don't you take something and lie down? Nancy suggested, her voice gentle and concerned. I'll bring you dinner in bed. You don't have to do that. I want to. You've been working so hard. Let me take care of you. Lewis agreed. Went upstairs. Took ibuprofen. Only ibuprofen, carefully noted. Lay down on the bed. 30 minutes later, Nancy brought up a tray. Soup, crackers, tea. She sat on the edge of the bed, watching him eat with an expression of such convincing care that Lewis almost admired the performance. Better, she asked. Yeah, thanks. She leaned down and kissed his forehead. Get some rest. I'll clean up and let you sleep. Lewis watched her leave with the tray, watched the bedroom door close. Then he waited. Hours passed. Lewis lay in the dark, listening to the house settle, listening to Nancy move around downstairs. Eventually, silence. Around midnight, he heard footsteps on the stairs. The bedroom door opened a crack. Nancy's silhouette appeared, checking to see if he was asleep. Lewis kept his breathing steady, even the rhythm of deep sleep. The door closed again. More silence. Then, around 2 in the morning, Lewis heard something that made his pulse spike. The garage door opening. He went to the window. Nancy's car was gone. In its place, Dylan's truck sat in the driveway. Lewis moved quickly. He'd prepared for this possibility, had a bag ready with essentials, had mapped out exactly what he needed to do. He slipped out of the bedroom, down the stairs, avoiding the boards that creaked. The recording system was running. The cameras were documenting everything. Lewis left through the back door, circled around to his truck parked on the street, and drove to a position where he could see his house but wouldn't be visible. Then he called Rebecca. "It's happening," he said simply. "I'm on my way. Don't do anything stupid. Too late for that." 20 minutes later, Rebecca's car pulled up behind his. She got out, camera already in hand, and slid into Lewis's passenger seat. "What's the situation?" "Nancy left. Dylan's inside. I don't know what they're planning, but the garage door opened and my car's still in there." Rebecca's expression darkened. "Carbon monoxide. That's my guess. We need to call the police." "Not yet. I need them caught in the act. Otherwise, it's just speculation." "Lewis, 5 more minutes. If nothing happens, we call. But if something does, I need you documenting it." Rebecca looked like she wanted to argue, but didn't. She raised her camera, lens focused on the house. They waited. 3 minutes later, lights came on in the garage. Through the small window, Lewis could see Dylan moving around. Then the garage door opened again, manually, quietly, and Dylan came out, climbed into his truck, and drove away. "That's it," Rebecca said. "No," Lewis said slowly. "He just started something. We wait." Another hour passed. Nothing. Then, just before 4 in the morning, Nancy's car pulled back into the driveway. She got out, looked around like she was checking for witnesses, and went inside through the front door. Lewis waited another 10 minutes. Then he drove back to the house, parked in his usual spot, and walked inside like he was coming home from an unexpected late-night drive. Nancy was in the kitchen, making coffee, still fully dressed despite the hour. She jumped when she saw him. "Lewis, you scared me. What are you doing up?" "Couldn't sleep. Went for a drive." "You?" "Same. Insomnia." She smiled, but her eyes were calculating. "Want coffee?" "Sure." They sat at the kitchen table, drinking coffee, talking about nothing, while Lewis noticed Nancy kept glancing toward the garage door. "Something wrong?" he asked. "No, just tired. You seem jumpy." "I'm fine." She stood abruptly. "Actually, I think I'll try to get a few more hours of sleep." "You coming?" "In a bit." Nancy went upstairs. Lewis waited until he heard the bedroom door close. Then he went to the garage. The door from the house opened smoothly. Lewis stepped inside, turning on the overhead light. His car sat exactly where he'd left it. He walked around it slowly, checking for anything unusual. Then he found it, a small device attached to the exhaust pipe, wired to what looked like a remote timer. Professional enough to work, amateur enough to be traced. Lewis photographed it from every angle with his phone. Then he very carefully removed it, placing it in a sealed bag he'd brought for exactly this purpose. He went back inside, secured the device in his office safe, and added a detailed entry to his documentation file. Then, finally, Lewis allowed himself a moment of exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion, mental, emotional. The weight of 7 months spent sleeping next to someone planning his murder. 7 months of calculated performance. 7 months of documenting his own attempted assassination. But it was almost over. The next morning, Lewis called his lawyer. Not Rebecca, though she'd been invaluable. His criminal defense lawyer. "I need you to review something," Lewis said. "And then I need you to help me hand this to the right authorities." The meeting took 3 hours. The lawyer examined every piece of evidence. Recordings, photos, financial trails, Rebecca's investigative reports, the device from the garage, the wine test results, text message backups, everything. When he finished, he sat back in his chair and let out a long breath. "This is comprehensive. Will hold up?" "It should. You've been meticulous about staying within legal boundaries. The recordings are admissible because of your homeowner disclosure." The financial documentation is public record plus your own account records. The surveillance is legal investigative work. The device is evidence of an actual crime in progress. The lawyer paused. The question is whether you're ready for what comes next. Which is, once we turn this over, it becomes public. Your marriage, your wife's affair, the plot against your life, all of it becomes part of the public record. People will judge you for how you handled this, for not confronting her immediately, for the surveillance, for staying in the house while gathering evidence. Let them judge. The lawyer studied him. You're certain? She tried to kill me. She married me for my money and planned my murder. I don't care what people think about how I responded to that. All right then. The lawyer gathered the files. I'll arrange a meeting with the county prosecutor's office, probably next week. In the meantime, you should not be alone with your wife. Can you stay somewhere else? No, Louis. If I suddenly leave, she'll know something's wrong. She'll run or destroy evidence or do something that compromises the case. I stay until this is done properly. The lawyer didn't look happy, but didn't argue. That week was the longest of Louis's life. He went through the motions at home, had dinner with Nancy, watched television together, pretended everything was normal. Nancy seemed on edge. She kept checking her phone, kept watching Louis like she was waiting for something. On Friday evening, 5 days after Louis had found the device in the garage, Nancy made dinner again. Chicken, vegetables, wine. She set Louis's plate in front of him with a smile that didn't quite mask something desperate in her eyes. Eat up, she said. You've been looking thin. Louis looked at the food, looked at Nancy, thought about the device in his office safe. The evidence stacked against her. The meeting with the prosecutor scheduled for Monday morning. He picked up his fork, pushed the food around his plate, took a small bite of chicken. Nancy watched him intently. How is it? She asked. Good. Really good. Louis took another bite, chewed slowly, swallowed. You've been cooking a lot more lately. I appreciate it. I like taking care of you. They finished dinner, cleaned up together, moved to the living room where Nancy suggested they watch a movie. Halfway through, Louis pretended to feel drowsy. I'm exhausted. Think I'll head up early. Want me to come with you? In a bit. Finish the movie. Louis went upstairs, got ready for bed, lay down and waited. An hour later, Nancy came up. She climbed into bed beside him, and Louis felt her lying there in the darkness, awake, breathing carefully controlled. He pretended to sleep deeply, complete with soft snoring. After what felt like hours, Nancy got up. Louis heard her footsteps on the stairs, heard the garage door open again. This time, he didn't wait. Louis got up, dressed quickly, and left through the back door. He called Rebecca first, then his lawyer, then, finally, 911. I need to report an attempted murder in progress, he said calmly. My wife is in the garage right now, and I believe she's setting up my car to kill me with carbon monoxide. The dispatcher's voice went sharp and professional. Sir, where are you right now? Outside my house. I'm safe, but you need to send officers immediately. They're on the way. Stay on the line with me. Louis watched from the tree line at the edge of his property as police cars arrived. Silent at first, lights off. They surrounded the house. Officers approached the front and back doors simultaneously. Louis watched as his garage door was forced open. Watched as Nancy was brought out in handcuffs, her face pale and shocked in the harsh beam of police flashlights. She was screaming. Not pleas, not denials. Anger. You bastard, she yelled toward the darkness, not knowing exactly where Louis was but knowing he was watching. You were supposed to be asleep. This was supposed to work. One of the officers told her she had the right to remain silent. She didn't listen. Do you know how long I've waited? 7 months of playing your loving wife. 7 months of pretending I gave a damn about your boring life and your boring business. 7 months. And you. The officer guided her forcefully into the patrol car. Her voice was cut off as the door closed. Rebecca appeared at Louis's side. You okay? Yes. That was insane. You know that, right? You could have been killed. But I wasn't. More police arrived. Louis was asked to come to the house to make a formal statement. He spent the next 4 hours walking detectives through everything. The wedding night discovery, the 7 months of documentation, the evidence he'd gathered, the device he'd found. Nancy's final attempt that evening. They took the device, took his recordings, took his files. The detective in charge, a woman named Martinez, listened to everything with an expression that shifted from skeptical to disturbed to something close to impressed. "You're saying you lived with her for 7 months, knowing she was planning to kill you?" Martinez asked. "Yes. That's either very brave or very stupid." "It's thorough," Lewis corrected. "If I confronted her immediately or left, she would have adapted, covered her tracks, possibly gotten away with it. This way, there's no room for doubt." Martinez couldn't argue with that. Dylan Mercer was arrested before dawn, pulled from his apartment still half asleep, confused about what was happening until the charges were explained to him. Nancy's Uncle Frank was arrested in Illinois 3 days later. Turned out he'd been running a similar scheme with 2 other people simultaneously. Nancy's plot was just one of his active projects. The case built itself from there. The prosecutor's office had everything they needed: conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, theft, attempted murder. The charges stacked up like invoices. Nancy tried to claim she'd been coerced, that Dylan had threatened her, that the recordings were taken out of context. None of it held up against the weight of evidence Lewis had compiled. The trial took 8 months. Lewis attended every day, sitting in the gallery, watching Nancy's lawyers try desperately to poke holes in the case. They couldn't. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Nancy received a sentence of 25 years. Dylan got 15. Frank, with his prior record, got 30. Lewis watched the sentencing with no satisfaction, no triumph, just the quiet confirmation that consequences had arrived exactly as they should. After the trial, people had opinions. Some thought Lewis was a hero for exposing Nancy. Others thought he'd been reckless for staying in danger. A few thought the whole thing was his fault for not seeing the signs earlier. Lewis didn't engage with any of it. He sold a house. Too many bad memories. Too many nights spent lying awake next to calculated betrayal. He moved to a smaller place across town, focused on his business, hired Rebecca part-time to vet new employees and major contracts. Years passed. Lewis didn't remarry, didn't date much, found that he preferred the simplicity of work, of time spent with genuine friends, of projects he could control. One afternoon, 5 years after Nancy's sentencing, Rebecca called with news. Nancy's trying to get her sentence reduced. Claims she's a model prisoner, found religion, deeply regrets her actions. Will it work? Probably not. The parole board doesn't look kindly on planned murder, especially when it's this well documented. But I thought you should know. Lewis thanked her and hung up. He thought about Nancy occasionally, wondered if she'd actually changed or if this was just another performance. Wondered if she understood, even now, why what she'd done was wrong beyond just getting caught. He decided it didn't matter. Nancy had made choices. Those choices had consequences. Whether she accepted that or spent the rest of her life claiming to be misunderstood wasn't Lewis's concern. He learned something valuable from the experience, though. Trust wasn't something to give freely. It was something earned slowly, proven consistently, and verified carefully. Some people would call that cynical. Lewis called it realistic. He built his second marriage, to his business, to his quiet life, to his carefully chosen friends, on that foundation. And it held. It was stable. It was secure. Exactly what he'd always wanted. Years later still, almost a decade after the trial, Lewis received a letter forwarded from his old address. It was from Nancy. He almost threw it away unopened, almost let it join the trash without a second thought. But curiosity won. The letter was 4 pages, handwritten, careful. Nancy wrote about her time in prison, about therapy, about finally understanding what she'd done. She didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't ask for anything, really, just explained. She wrote, "I thought love was something other people had and I could fake. I thought stability was something I could steal instead of build. I was wrong about all of it. I was wrong about you. You were never the weak, trusting fool I thought you were. You were just kind, and I mistook kindness for weakness." Lewis read the letter twice, then filed it away with the rest of the documentation from that period of his life. He didn't respond. Some betrayals deserved acknowledgement, but not engagement. Deserved to be remembered, but not revisited. Lewis had moved on. built something better, created the life he'd always wanted, stable, secure, honest. And if that life was quieter than most people preferred, if it lacked the drama of romance and the chaos of constant connection, that was fine. Lewis had learned that peace was worth more than passion. That caution was smarter than trust. That consequences, when properly documented and patiently pursued, eventually found their mark. He'd won not because he'd destroyed Nancy. He'd won because he'd refused to let her destroy him. And in the end, that was all that mattered.